Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me out there? Excellent. So it's our first hybrid event post-pandemic. So I want to welcome everybody to DAV's National Service and Legislative Headquarters. It's nice to actually see humans again on the street. For those online, certainly welcome to the event. You know, CAPCON is a culmination of an entire effort of all those going through the LEAD program to put together a capstone event. And DAV is very proud to host it here at our National Service and Legislative Headquarters. So make yourselves comfortable, relax. There's going to be a great agenda. And as we get started, I want to talk over just a couple items about DAV. For those of you who don't know DAV, we're actually celebrating our centennial anniversary, 100 years of service. So as you get into these kinds of generational divides, there's some things that happen frequently and some things that do not. Pandemics do not. So again, a big challenge for us, skipping an entire year. We had our national commander carry over for our second year, and now we're in the process of reopening and getting ready for our national convention. So big year for DAV, and we couldn't be prouder than the opportunity to host CAPCON with our partners from HillVets. And I want to tell you a little bit about some activities in the building, and then I want to talk about HillVets proper. So in this building, this is one of our two headquarters. Our national headquarters is in Kentucky, and here we run all those public-facing policy side departments of the DAV. So we have our National Legislative Department that primarily focuses on the legislative agenda. That also means that they're legislative lobbyists and obviously engaged in a lot of processes that you are. They also engage in the administration side, dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the White House activities. The team that we have here in Washington will be testifying this afternoon. National Legislative Director Joy Elam will be testifying before the Senate this afternoon. We also have our National Service Program. That's DAV's largest program. So we have 100 offices around the United States, co-located with the Veterans Benefits Administration offices where they make claims decisions, also on military bases where veterans are in transition. And then we have half of our communication staff here. And the communication staff is a hybrid model as well. So they engage not only in communication in regards to making sure our million members are well involved, well informed, and have a point of contact, but they also provide a legislative lobbying process. So the Deputy Communications Director, Ashley Burns, is also a lobbyist before Congress and spends part of her time on our legislative activities. So that's kind of this building, and that's what DAV does here at our Washington headquarters. So just taking a step back in regards to our affiliation with HillVets. So again, I mentioned that we're a 100-year-old organization, and HillVets is a reasonably new organization, but there's some common ground that kind of brought us together. So some of that common ground amongst everybody that's sitting here and everybody that's online I wanted to talk about, and that is we have some universal ideas that match up very well. So the first item of common ground is why we do what we do. You know, we've worn a uniform, we've been a part of the military experience, and while we are sitting here in civilian attire, we all recognize that under that mold used to be a uniform. The courage, the commitment, and the responsibilities of defending our nation comes with an enormous amount of institutional knowledge, and it comes with discipline that you don't normally find in the private sector, which brings you to the opportunity to lead and influence lawmakers. Policy provisions for veterans has never been at a weaker point. The actual leadership in Congress that have served in our armed forces, again, very small in comparison to years and decades of the past. So we have the same vision that more veterans need to be engaged in the policy making for our nation. The second item I'll touch on is, and I kind of mentioned it, is the idea of a uniform. You know, in the military, you're wearing your uniform, and it's technically a resume. When you look at somebody, you see the stars, the stripes, You see the chevrons they're wearing. You look at their sleeve, and in an instant, how many stripes are there? You know how their seniority is. You see the medals that they're wearing as far as what their skill sets are. And when we transition out of the military and into the civilian sector, you lose that resume. So it gives us common knowledge that everybody around us has had that experience. So again, common ground, very similar to how our chapters, our departments, and DAV as a whole functions. It's camaraderie that brings us together, and there's strength in numbers. So the more of us that work together, the better policies we can make for our nation's veterans, for the nation as a whole. And then the last thing I'll talk about is networking. You know, we're not just an organization. HillVets is not an organization. I mean, we're families. We have that close of an affiliation. We get to know each other, and we're going to move on to different paths in life. Some will work in the administration. Some will work in Congress. Some folks will work in home offices. Some folks will drift away from this altogether, but you will always have this connection to fall back on. So it's that conduit that brings us together. So we're all in this together. If you need something, you need to reach out, you know you can reach back to HillVets, you can reach back to DAV at any time throughout your entire career, or if you're giving a hand up to somebody else that needs assistance, and we'll be there for each other. So again, as I wrap up here, I just want to congratulate all the lead resources that built CAPCON this year. Looking at the agenda that's on the brochure in the back and on the placard on the side, this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for you to see those folks that bring, you know, our nation's leadership, some of the ingenuity, and some of the future programs to bear. It's an opportunity for you to engage, and certainly, if I don't see you between now and this evening, I'll see you on the rooftop for the soiree. So thank you all very much. Good.
Yeah, they're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're just getting set up here real quick. I want to take the moment to appreciate this hybrid setup that we have. We're doing a pretty good job here. And honestly, I think it's amazing that we can have experts not only here in DC, but across the nation speak with us today. My name is Jason Sodoriak. I am an economist and transportation planner with the Volpe Center at the Department of Transportation in Boston, Massachusetts. Also a veteran, Marine Corps, 6 years in the infantry. And as a lead vets protege, I have the honor of leading the first panel this afternoon. And the panel is titled Weaponization of Information, Media's Role as an Instrument of Warfare in the 21st Century. I apologize, I have my phone, I'm not tweeting. I'm just using it for notes. Today, almost all media is created as social media through a network of applications that allow people to share and create content. And just like the importance of the radio during World War II in both the propaganda war and coordinating military assets, so too is the social media in the past decade. From the rise of Islamic State to Russian influencing conflict in Ukraine, the world is experiencing a new method of warfare that is cheap, rapid, and devastating. The same techniques that a viral marketing campaign that perhaps Taylor Swift would use are now being used by militaries across the country. Today, our panelists are up to the task of discussing this broad and emerging phenomenon, and I'm delighted to introduce them. We have Marilyn Deangelo. She is a managing member of the Counter Disinformation Resource Group. She's a thought leader in the field of disinformation, focusing on the domestic and international impacts of message manipulation and information warfare. Here with us online, we have Colonel Andrew Whiskeyman. He is the head of U.S. Central Command's Information Operations Division within the U.S. Central Command Operations. His previous assignment was as the Chief of Strategy for the CENTCOM Joint Cyber Center and has written extensively on disinformation for the Washington Institute. Our final panelist, Maggie Angler, is a technologist and researcher focused on applying statistics and machine learning to mitigate abuses in the online ecosystem, including disinformation, harassment, and fraud. She is currently a senior data scientist at Twitter. And before we begin, I want to preface that these are the opinions that you'll be hearing today are the panelists' own, and they don't necessarily reflect their employers. And so I'd like to start a question, and I'll bring it to you, Colonel Whiskeyman, and also you, Marilyn. Experts have pointed to the rise of ISIS as one of the pivotal moments for utilizing social media as a military strategy. By using social media, their initial small force was amplified enough to rout large portions of the Iraqi military and strike fear in the Western world. Almost a decade later, as the US military completes its withdrawal from Afghanistan, we are starting to see a similar media campaign conducted by the Taliban. What lessons can be learned from battling ISIS in the digital space, and what can we anticipate in this next phase from Afghanistan? And I'll start with you, Colonel.
Hey, thanks, and quick comms check that you got me. All right.
Perhaps I'll start with you, Marilyn.
No audio?
We're having some difficulties hearing on our end in just a second. Sorry about that. Like I said, hybrid model. It's new, coming out of the pandemic. We're all adapting.
I'll talk again for a second. Is it coming?
Perhaps in the meantime, Marilyn, would you like to take on this question first?
Sure. So, I mean, Al Qaeda's early successes. I don't want to jump in over here. I'll let you figure it out. Al Qaeda's early successes in the region, say in Libya, were tied to their ability to use social media. What we've seen with that is that they were able to address local concerns. They were able to rebrand themselves, distance themselves from ISIS. So we see it used successfully. For us, I think it depends on our long-term goals in the region. But the work that's been done over the last 20 years has built networks that can be utilized moving forward. Those networks have empowered women. They have taught youth that there are other alternatives. They've opened up options that were not previously available or known to people. So that work has been done. And I think our future in the region really depends on what we want to see happen. But those footholds that were there can be fostered. And being able to lean on the international community, whether it's the United States that's still in the region or one of our allies, I think gives us a little bit of flexibility and some really good work done to be built on for the future.
Great. Do we want to check in on the audio?
So yeah, everybody's saying they can hear on YouTube. It's just us in the building. So we're trying to find a direct connection into the power of the internet. I don't know that there's anything we can do right now. Can we play the YouTube video live for us while we're here?
Might have some feedback issues.
Yeah.
Sorry for those who are watching online. We are having some technical difficulties, and I think
Analog is losing.
that's right. Thank you for your patience. It did work.
I'm sure.
We will wait so we can make sure they can jump in.
Population. What is it? 63% population of Afghanistan is under the age of 24. So that really does provide an opportunity to work with the same kind of population we're working with in the United States to try to normalize different behaviors and create the kind of future, both digitally and in real world, that we want to see.
Yeah, and I think something to keep in mind is the landscape is completely different despite fighting both these wars almost simultaneously. The literacy rate in Afghanistan is very different than Iraq, and the infrastructure for actually telecommunications is very different. There's a lot of good reasons why the Taliban hasn't picked up the same tactics as ISIS over the last 10 years until relatively now, right?
Mm-hmm. The opportunity for exploitation of budding democracies is huge when social media is prevalent. So that almost kind of can work in our favor at this point, right? As we've been on the ground, we've had the opportunity to work with people. But as it grows, as it continues, we see the challenges that we face in our own society, and they will be exponentially harder to control elsewhere.
Right. And we can circle back once we get this audio up. So maybe we'll move on to the next question. Are the concepts of misinformation and disinformation new, or is it really that the techniques, the reach, the intensity of social media, what makes this innovative tool of warfare?
So the terms mis and disinformation are relatively modern, but the concept of message manipulation is as old as humanity itself, right? So there are punctuations in the progression of human history that mass communication erupts and completely disrupts the status quo. 15th century, you have the printing press. Mm-hmm. In the last 20 years, we have the rise of algorithmically manipulated social media news feeds. So we're seeing kind of the direct aftermath of that boom. But having state and non-state actors working through centralized plans to manipulate the behavior of a target population. That is not a new behavior. It's not new in warfare. And it's definitely not new, for the United States. Finding a way to attack the enemy without provoking an armed response or without having to resort to active conflict is actually the ultimate success, right? So we have seen this play out over the last 20 years, obviously, but this isn't new for us, as this has been a post-World War II issue with the Soviets and now the Russians. This has been an ongoing, active campaign. With a few years of quiet, aside from that, this has not been a new. What's new is the platform, right? We've moved on to the digital world. But if we consider targeted information campaigns a form of social engineering, we can define these kind of information operations as a soft intervention or a low intensity gray zone conflict, I think, depending on your motivations.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is that you're more often than not, you're seeing totalitarian regimes encouraging people to participate in these spaces and speech, while in the past it was to just strip them that right away, right?
I mean, we have different motivations than an authoritarian country would, right? Yeah. And we have different challenges. We want to foster open dialogue, open access to communication. This is not something that China or Russia want to see. But they've been able to successfully capitalize on these strategies because of their institutional structures. They don't have to follow the same rules of the road that we do, right, that new democracies do. They don't have the same kind of expectations. And so that's what the kind of challenges we face in this.
Yeah. And when it comes to actually wielding social media as a tool, what's interesting is the service members that are now listing in the military, they're becoming more versed in this technology than previous generations. I'm an old millennial, and
I
have to say, those who are now enlisting in the military, they understand this culture, this technology, way better than I can. So I wonder, having this upbringing with social media and everyone's got a phone in their hands, how might that impact the military's ability to use social media as a tool of warfare?
So it's an interesting topic, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You have a young military personnel who are fully versed. They grew up with it. They know it. They are a little harder to get if you're going to work on disinformation campaigns, misinformation. If you're going to target them, they have a little better of a filter than, say, not even just millennials, but older populations more so. That is a fantastic resource and asset. The other side of that is that the habitual sharing of public opinion, life, location, the platforms they choose to engage on, foreign-owned platforms like TikTok. This is a national security vulnerability. So you have both sides of it. But on the bright side, there's nothing that can't be remedied through training or education, kind of an internet etiquette understanding for servicemen and women. And I mean, society at large. But being able to recognize that social media is full of vulnerabilities, but they aren't uncompatible, right? They are easily remedied with a little bit of change in user behavior. So. Oh, all the tech problems. This is the truth, though. I mean, we have an opportunity to connect to each other in a fantastic way, the internet, right? But the people in this room, the people who connect to each other, the bubbles that we live in, we create. These are bubbles that not everyone lives in. If you leave the Beltway, if you leave the coasts, if you leave the little digital world that we feed and enable, the message is different. The reality is different. The view is different. And I think that we become so inundated with the phone, the like, the share, the messaging that we're given, the news, all of these things that we have given priority to in our lives, in our belief systems. That is truthfully the biggest danger. We have given this the top priority, and it is a priority as it's become a threat. But people choose this. They choose to engage. And there is a reality outside of this that doesn't have to be secondary.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You think the advantage that comes with growing up in social media and having the world at your fingertips is this expanded empathetic capacity. But in some ways, it actually narrows it. So is there really an advantage that this new generation coming forward to enlist in the military, is there really even an advantage that makes them more versed in engaging with populations outside of our country?
I think that when we have an opportunity to reach other people, there are benefits there. Absolutely. What hasn't been established are appropriate norms and behaviors for civil discourse on the internet. When things started, it was cat videos. It was mom and dad and grandpa, and everybody gets to kind of, catch up. And that was wonderful. And that was the intention, right? I don't think anybody at Facebook or Twitter intended to disrupt the entire communication flow of the earth. That was not their intention in a negative way. I think they definitely wanted to break things, right? Move fast, break things. But for us, for CDRG, for me personally, for I think a lot of people, being able to work on normalizing what behaviors online should look like, right? Teaching people that the information they're getting might be being targeted at them for a reason, whether it's financial, whether it's political. The messaging is not benign. There is always some kind of ultimate goal for someone else. You are the product. The people are being used and victimized, and they don't know it. And I mean, I think that is starting to become a recognized reality. But I think as this younger generation comes up, they will have that understanding where people who were late adapters and late adopters did not. So that will give an extra layer of support and understanding, and it'll be a little harder to manipulate in 20 years from now. But it is kind of a waiting game, and the work we do now will yield results down the line.
Yeah, and honestly, that is a good segue into the next question. What are the moral and ethical considerations that military should be considering regards to using social media, particularly for the intended use of military strategy?
So multitudes, right? There are so many ethical, it's so murky. For the United States, for our government, it will be, and like I said, our population has been victimized, traumatized. People are angry, people are reactive, people are online, and they are not happy. It is divisive, and that's what it's been created to do. How do you use the technology to regain the trust of your society? How do you use the technology to affect change elsewhere? I mean, it's a very fine line between utilizing the same tactics that were used against us and not you don't want to have to be the one to use those tactics against your own or for the benefit of your own society, but they are successful tactics. I think there's an importance in regaining trust. I think there's an importance of not becoming, not politicizing national security themes, information. A lot of that though comes down to the mouthpiece of the messaging, right? So everybody, people in this room, people in this city, people are dedicating their lives to and their careers to public service, to the betterment of this country. And just as much as you all believe in your choice and your nation, the media believes in what they do, right? I think by and large, most journalists believe in the mission that they have taken on to tell stories, to spotlight positive and negative of society. But there is a personal responsibility and an institutional responsibility, both in media and in defense, for that greater good. And I think specifically for media, that hasn't quite come to the recognition that it needs to. The divisive kind of messaging that garners clicks, that does really well for engagement, is not the kind of messaging that our society needs right now. And it's not something that's going to strengthen our position moving forward internationally, domestically. These are things that people are trained in ethics. Any decent undergrad program, you'll go through an ethics class, but I think more specifically, what are the ethics of messaging online? And that's something too that comes back to education programs that haven't even been created yet, concepts that are still in their infancy. How do you get people to understand the depth and destruction of divisive messaging and the repercussions I think we're seeing currently?
So there's two components to it. One is the institution's responsibility, but also our own individual responsibilities, which I think is particularly important because unlike rifles and tanks, the general population may never even see those. They don't interact with them, but they interact with their phone every day, and they're normalizing the practices that these militaries are using for ill will. What do you think about a Geneva Convention code of ethics for the use of social media in this context?
So we have a digital citizenry that I think we have a responsibility to protect. The international consortium around doing that, I mean, there's been work through the UN, there's been little bits here and there. I mean, over the years, there have been people that have been trying to coordinate on this. But I don't think we have the political will because I think there's still exploitation to be had. If you want to use a weapon against someone, you're not going to want to lock down that weapon, right? You're going to want to make sure you get everything out of it before you say, well, this isn't really good to use yet. So I think that there needs to be international agreement, but we have different spheres of influence. And so what works for us, what works for our sphere of influence is not what works for China and Russia. And their agreement to such a reality is, it could just be on its face. They could do it. But
right. Could be handcuffing ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so over the last 20 years, the U.S. has been primarily engaged in proxy wars against non-state actors. There's always the chance that we could end up in a conflict with a state actor, one of our adversaries, Russia, China. how do you think social media would play out in a conflict like this, particularly with China and their relationship with Taiwan?
So historically, China has not targeted American citizens with messaging the way Russia has. Though with the coziness between the Russian Federation and the Chinese Communist Party, you would think that, you know, militarily, economically, their pairings, technologically, things will start to mirror each other more. So their friendship, not quite alliance, but their friendship does make for a high concern, because if you have someone with the technological policing and surveillance capabilities of Chinese with the tactics of the Russians, you're looking at possibly one of the more dangerous challenges for the future. Currently, we see China works a lot on negative anti-US messaging to international audiences. So their propaganda style currently, and what has been historically, is more defaming internationally, weakening our alliances. And that's, I would think, what we're going to continue to see currently. I think there was an opportunity to escalate in Taiwan over the last year, and we didn't quite see it move to a point of like hard action. It's still in soft mode, at least for us. But if that were to move into something that we were being actively targeted, that would be highly dangerous.
Right. And surely China will, if they were to engage in Taiwan, initially it would be by putting misinformation, disinformation with that general population. But I think you bring up a good point that perhaps what we saw in the invasion of Georgia and the conflict in Ukraine, where maybe there wasn't a strong enough messaging to put boots on the ground, we could possibly see that in future conflicts where the messaging isn't the same because there is distrust amongst our coalition partners. And so you don't have the momentum, right?
The messaging isn't the same, and it should never be the same, right? You can get the same message to two different audiences if you tailor the message. I mean, what you're going to tell your domestic audience is not the same as what you're going to tell the international audience. And especially if you're trying to manipulate them for a behavior that you want. If you're trying to unify them, you can give them the same message framed differently, and they would probably come back to the same place in the middle. I think the thing is that we are not utilizing those tactics well enough, personally, I would believe, to make it beneficial. We are seeing the devastation of those effects in our own domestic realities. People that get really good at this are going to be successful at this over the next generation. People, nations, state actors, non-state actors. I think the importance, though, is knowing that you can be delivering one message to your population and you can be delivering another message to the international community, and it can benefit your end result, right?
And so, not to leave on a completely dire note, I wonder what could be done. Particularly, we've got the 20th anniversary of the global war on terror coming up this fall. And reflecting back on that, you could see established mainstream media outlets following a drumbeat, getting in line with the administration on what needs to be done with Afghanistan, leading to the invasion of Afghanistan. What can be done, or rather, what will be social media's role in a future flashpoint that we could see on the horizon?
So I can't believe it's been 20 years since 9/11, first of all. I was a kid in Jersey watching the news, I was going to say logged on, but no, just just watching. And the media was trusted, right? The world was confusing. Things were scary. And all of a sudden, I didn't know what was going on, but the news knew what was going on. And I trusted that source. I trusted it as something that I could go to and understand. And it gave me a bit of a grounding. And for a lot of people, after 9/11, they enlisted. For me, I went towards the information. I needed to know more. I wanted to know more. And I figured they knew what was going on. Hey, let me join them. And 20 years later, I recognize that that is the output, right? The input comes here. The messaging that is being fed to the media is this is where it starts. This is the root. The people who, deal with the press, the people who send out the press releases, the lawmakers, people who sit on panels, changing the conversation, right? Changing the narrative, pushing the conversation to be more unifying, more less divisive, recognizing that our nation's listeners need to be reassured of their safety in the platforms that they engage in. That's going to make the difference as to how we react or recuperate from the next flashpoint. I don't think that media can prevent or change. I think that, the media follows the ebb and flow of the current administration. Right now, we're seeing a confluence of federal and media attention on domestic terrorism. We don't generally see our defense practitioners focusing domestically, and we, by and large, see our media very hyper-focused domestically. So to have everybody kind of watching internally right now gives us a really unique opportunity. The tone and tenor that the media takes over the next few years, I think, will determine how we maneuver the next crisis, whatever form that takes.
Oh, hopefully that we're on top of it.
You tell me. I think we have the opportunity to move past anything that comes our way, right? As Americans, as a democracy, as people who are very smart and sit in rooms and think about solutions. There are opportunities to work with the rest of our society to get the kind of understanding and messaging out to our people that we need to move forward. Do I think the next potential crisis will be domestic or internationally rooted? I don't know. I mean, we're working really hard right now, it seems, to tear ourselves down, cannibalize our own realities, our own institutions, our own democracy. And, we kind of make it easy to do, right? We're not perfect as a nation. We have our issues, of course, but it weakens us internationally to do that publicly, right? And there has to be some kind of a message that brings us back to our roots, to our grounding, to our opportunity, and to our blessings to say, we have an opportunity to make things different. Our disagreements are part of our greatness. We are allowed to disagree. Mm-hmm. We are supposed to disagree. We were never supposed to agree. It was never built for that. So I think kind of reminding ourselves and reminding the world and, that that's what makes us a democracy and a strong force moving forward, and protecting those ideals will kind of save us in the end, right?
Wonderfully put. In our final 10 minutes, I'll ask one more question and we can open it up if anyone would like to submit a question or not. We can continue the conversation. But with what you said, it seems as if there is a huge amount of responsibility as us as individuals, particularly because a lot of this content is going to be, it is created by us as individuals. We think of TikTok, YouTube. What can we do to become literate on this topic, to become more responsible?
So individual responsibility is huge here. When we are online, who are the people we follow? What are the organizations that we trust? How do we engage with those? Recognizing that sharing something without reading it because it supports your viewpoint, or sharing something to vilify another organization or group, people are getting like dopamine fix at a certain point, right? They share, somebody agrees, they feel smart, it's happening all in real time. But they are not realizing that those people that are liking and sharing and commenting are the only ones that are hearing their message because they also agree, right? People are in these little spirals that it's an echo chamber. So if you have a point, the people are going to support you because that's who it was served to. Again, for me, it's crazy because I've spent 20 years living and breathing this and being logged on and wanting to find a solution. And it's funny because the first time in my life that I was able to disconnect and log off, I realized how lovely it was. That this is only as divisive as we make it, as we allow it to be. And being able to put down the phone and take a look around and engage with the humans that you actually know and realize that the world is not as nasty as we're being told it is. So that's the first point. As for education programs, I mean, working with teachers, right? Can we get this kind of understanding into teacher lesson plans? Teachers have logged off for the summer, but they're going to head in for in-services. Can we talk about this with students often? Getting this into our education systems as just a recognition of the problem is going to pay out in the future. Civil society organizations, libraries, who's trusted? How can we get trusted messaging back out there? And I think that working with, this is a veterans organization. How many others are out there? How many can you get to feed the same message out in different ways to different places? Media works to pick up information and spread it around. But the sources of those informations are minimal, honestly, at best. So you have people that are really digging, right? Investigative journalists. Most of those newsrooms are pulling their information from feeds. So there are international feeds, there are national feeds. Everybody pulls the same feeds and they all share it out to the same people. It's the same information. It's repeated out nationwide. If you can get into those feeds, you've now got your message out to the nation. So working with the institutions that are already functioning, understanding how they work, utilizing that to get that critical mass around the kind of messaging that we want out there that will be beneficial for us. Is it a strategy? Absolutely. Is it one that people are using nefariously? Absolutely. So let's use it for us. Let's utilize those opportunities to get people on theme, get organizations on message, and keep beating that drum until it's into the bloodstream. How long is that going to take? A while. But there's enough coordination in DC, in this country. I think that that's a possibility that can work to start getting people to understand.
Right. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, great. We do have one in the audience, and feel free.
Thank you, Rich Strauss. Quick question. So over the years, we've seen, especially on social media, when you have these news articles that are being shared, a lot of your more reputable sources, your Washington Post, your New York Times, your USA Today, over the years, we've started seeing them charge for their subscription models to actually get people to subscribe, to make their profits as well. But in turn, we're seeing that less people are actually reading the articles and instead turning to articles that may not be as reputable but are free to read. Do we think that is causing at least some kind of modicum of an effect on the spread of disinformation?
Paywalls are a definite problem. Newsrooms over the last 20 years have been decimated. So they themselves are working with less people, less resources, less money. Clicks equal money, right? And so newsrooms and organizations that have stayed away from paywalls really do struggle for funding. They've kind of turned to a grant funding model, which is great. Public radio, public media does a lot of good work with that. The fact that the worst news stories are, well, it's like putting snacks at the checkout counter, right? They're right there. They're easy. You can have them, but they put the good stuff all the way on the shelf. You have to go get it. So yeah, that's the information accountability, literacy. You have to know that the things you're being handed right here are going to be the worst things, right? They are not well researched. They are not well, but they're clicky and people like them, and they definitely feed the need to share and vilify and, all the confirmation bias things. But the paywall is a problem. The paywall is a problem, but the algorithm that feeds the news feeds is also a problem. The fact that algorithms are fed by emotion and negative emotion is way more successful than positive is a problem. And that's a solution that comes, I wish, the tech people were here, right? But being people are creatures of their habitat. So if negativity and anger feed clicks, and clicks are your money, you're going to work to feed that beast. You're going to give things to people that make them feel in ways that get the reaction you want. How hard is the fix to change that connotation on the news feeds? Can we make positive things be what feeds your news feed? I'm sure they could probably figure that out at Twitter or Facebook. So there are definitely solutions within journalism. There are solutions that are personal responsibility, but the tech solutions are a big key piece to this. And I mean, at this point, economically, it benefits them to continue. And until it doesn't, they will likely continue, right? So are we looking at regulation changes? Are we looking at peer pressure? Can we pressure them into changing? Can we log off? We are the actual product, right? So are we going to do that? Probably not. But yeah, the paywall thing, paywalls are tough. And the best reporting is sometimes hidden behind it. I think we did see a big push over the pandemic to have good reporting and important information outside of the paywall. Especially, and I know Washington Post did it, but things that are public service are generally outside the paywall at a certain point. And I think maybe we could push to see a little bit more of that. But the organizations that are paying for reporting in different ways, like I said, with grant funding, those are the kinds of organizations that we should be partnering with. We should be supporting because they're enabling those reporters to do that work without having to put their content behind that paywall. So support your local media. Public.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
So we're going to be wrapping up. One thing that I wanted to mention that we weren't able to discuss, there's a huge responsibility on the private sector and maybe even a bit of a military industrial complex with these technologies, especially if it's in the best interest for even our own government to use it as an instrument of warfare. So we talked a lot about individual responsibility and militaries themselves, but I don't want to gloss over that. Thank you so much for putting this all on your shoulders. And thank you so much for all of your patience with the technology. I think we'll get on top of it. But please look up these panelists, look up their work, get engaged with them. Your social media was provided and all of your other links and whatnot. Do you have any closing comments for us today?
Well, I mean, thanks for having me. And I hope that I was entertaining enough for 3 people. Yeah, this is something that it is the challenge of our generation, right?
Yeah.
This is where we live. This is where we interact. This is where our children, not mine, but others, I don't have any, but this is where the children of the United States are going to exist, right? They are now indoctrinated. They did Zoom kindergarten. These kids are ready to go. And 10 years ago, we were worried that our kids couldn't compete because they weren't up to snuff technologically. And now they are. And they've been we're into a brave new world here. So making sure they understand the risks, the rewards, the opportunities. I think that's where we're gonna see the most, is the squeeze worth the juice? This is the point. This is the opportunity. Education programs, things like that, to be able to get our nation's children ready for what's ahead of them, will be a big deal. So yeah, for me, for what's the bottom line? Let's teach. Let's get people understanding the threats that are ahead of us and how to combat them.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.